Let's start with a motivating example. So there is this paper that was published a few years ago about pathological narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. So the authors define narcissism as one's capacity to maintain a relatively positive self-image through a variety of self, affect, and field regulatory processes. And it underlines one individual's needs for validation and affirmation, as well as the motivation to overtly and covertly seek out self-enhancement experiences from the social environment. The authors proposed that there are two types of narcissism. One that's normal and is characterized by support adaptive functioning, achievement motivation and ambition, contributes to self-esteem and well-being by increasing personal agency, helps with asserting interpersonal dominance and fueling approach, achievement, and motives, is associated with positive illusions about self and minimize negative self-information. And individuals with normal narcissism tend to be ambitious, satisfied, relatively successful, though may have disagreeable interpersonal relations. What about pathological narcissism? So pathological narcissism involves a significant regulatory deficits and maladaptive strategies to cope with disappointments. People with pathological narcissism shows difficulty handling threats to positive self-image, is associated with functional impairments and distress, has higher psychiatric comorbidity, and is characterized by two different types or themes: narcissistic grandiosity, which is characterized by inflated self-image, entitlement, exploitative behaviors, and narcissistic vulnerability, depleted self-image, shame, interpersonal hypersensitivity. Those are distinct constructs. So the authors argue that normal and pathological narcissism should be viewed as two different constructs rather than the opposite ends of a single continuum, as the absence of pathological narcissism does not necessarily indicate the presence of normal narcissism. So what are the characteristics of grandiose narcissistic personality? Why I'm giving you this example, I don't know, maybe you know someone that has these characteristics. So is people that have that exhibits aggression, have intense envy, lack of empathy, interpersonally exploitative acts, has fantasies of unlimited power, superiority, perfection, has entitled attitudes, usually distorts, disconfirming external information, and repress negative self and other representations. And there is the vulnerable one type of pathological narcissism, which is a personality characteristic or disorder. Is more related to shame, depression, social withdrawal, suicidality, rage responses to criticism, avoidance of relationships, difficulty maintaining self-esteem. So the question is, when we represent theories or hypotheses, usually in science, we use language to do so, right? So everything I discussed is you can understand. And even if you're not a psychologist, my explanation hopefully gives you some kind of understanding, at least in the basic level, about what are the differences between a normal and a pathological narcissism, and the two types of pathological narcissism, the grandiose one and the vulnerable one. Now imagine that you're doing a research and for some reason you think that normal or pathological narcissism is relevant to whatever it is that you're interested in. But you don't have a good measurement, you don't have a good assessment of either normal or pathological narcissism. So what could you do? You could try to do a literature review and try to find some validated instruments to measure pathological narcissism. You can partner with a scientist specialized in personality disorders, and then ask them to create a new instrument for you. Or because we are in 2025, you can use large language models to generate items for your research. So traditionally in psychometrics, we have a very specific way of developing new instruments, uh, being, being scales or tests or surveys. We start with the conceptualization and definition of the construct. We do a literature review to identify gaps in the literature, limitations, and opportunities for improvement in the current assessment tools. Then we sit down and then we write hundreds of items, or we hire people to do that for us. Then we hire experts in that field to revise the items that we wrote or that experts wrote for us. And then we refine and review the items based on expert input. And then, of course, later we need to collect data to validate the items, the instrument, etc. Or we can just use large language models. So here's one example. So everything I just said to you, all the content from the previous slides, so the definition of narcissism, definition of pathological narcissism, and definition of grandiose personality disorder was fed into a large language model. And you can see here that at the end, I'm writing, write 10 items of pathological narcissism, 5 items of narcissistic grandiosity, and 5 items of narcissistic vulnerability. Number the items from 1 to 10. And the result is like this. So we have a pathological narcissism overall, we have grandiosity, we have vulnerability. As you can see, it wasn't exactly what I asked for, right? So I asked 5 for grandiose narcissism, 5 for vulnerable narcissism, and the large language model gave me something else. So let's improve the prompt a little bit and see what happens. So now the prompt reads, you are an expert psychometrician specialized in writing excellent self-report items. I want you to write 5 items of pathological narcissism, grandiosity, the grandiosity type. Here are the characteristics of grandiose narcissism, and then there is the characteristics. Number your items from 1 to 5, and then boom, we have 5 items measuring pathological narcissism, the grandiose type. So what my question for you guys is, what is the difference between the first prompt and the second prompt? What can you see that is different? So let's start with the beginning of the prompt. So in the first prompt, I wrote definition of narcissism, and then I just copied the paper. Normal narcissism, the characteristics, pathological narcissism, the characteristics, grandiosity and vulnerability, the 2 types of pathological narcissism and their characteristics. And then I wrote, write 10 items for each. In the second one, I started the prompt with, you're an expert psychometrician specialized in writing excellent self-report items. So what is the qualitative difference between the first prompt and the second one? So what I did was I improved the prompt. The first one was, as you can see, lots of information. All the information here is extremely useful. But I'm not really clear, right? Although I'm asking it to write 10 items, 5 for grandiose, 5 for vulnerable narcissistic personality. It's not super clear exactly what I want the model to do, although I'm saying write 10 items. So writing a good prompt can make a big difference between you having exactly what you asked for and having something that you ask for in a higher level of quality. And And I can do the same thing for pathological narcissism with the vulnerable type, and the result will be also very good. So what we say in this field is that the instructions used and how they are put together or engineered can considerably impact the quality of a large language model output. So this basically shows in a high level what we'll be addressing in this course. So the first question that you should be able to answer tomorrow in the afternoon: what are the best practices for prompting? How do different prompting strategies impact the quality of the generated text or generated item? What prompting engineering methods exist and which one should I use? What types of large language models exist and which one should I use? What kind of system should I use for text generation and prompt engineering? And how can I have super fast outputs without relying on a supercomputer with lots of GPU capacity? So basically, these are some of the questions, not all the questions, but some of the questions you should be able to answer tomorrow in the afternoon after going through this training. All right, so that's the motivating example. So now let's start with part number one, our artificial intelligence and large language models, a very quick introduction. So the field of natural language processing is defined as the ability of a computer to understand, interpret, and analyze human language. There are several different types of natural language processing techniques that goes from sentiment analysis to identifying parts of a speech, to identifying the minimum length of the linguistic information, to you name it. There are several different types of techniques that composes natural language processing. The applications of natural language processing are many. Nowadays, it's much easier to teach than 15 years ago, because 15 years ago, the applications of natural language processing were very niche, very specific to people working with natural language processing. But nowadays, it's easy to say, well, chatbots, these are examples of applications of natural language processing methods. Machine translation. Also, everybody used to use Google Translate when they needed to translate text into other languages. Now we can use large language models to do that. Text summarization, the same. Sentiment analysis, the same. So many others. So NLP, or natural language processing, is a multidisciplinary field that deals with human language. So that's the general definition.